I don't know, man. It just feels good still, and the crowds keep showing up and liking it. The plane crash didn't kill Gary Rossington, but it never stopped trying. For 46 years, the last original member of Lynyrd Skynyrd kept a devastating secret from his fans. His body was falling apart. The crash left him with a heart so damaged it required 6 surgeries. The pain drove him to addiction. Doctors begged him to quit touring, warning it would kill him. But Gary refused to stop playing Freebird. What fans saw on stage wasn't the whole story. The real Gary was fighting just to stay alive. Gary Rossington was born in Jacksonville, Florida. In December 1951, he never got to know his father, who passed away shortly after he was born. That loss left a hole in his life, but it also made him stronger. His mother, Bernice, raised him alone, struggling to make ends meet. She worked hard and somehow managed to save up $8, just enough to buy Gary his first guitar from Sears. It was a cheap silver tone, but for Gary, it was everything. That guitar changed the course of his life. Growing up without a father, he poured his feelings into music. You could hear that pain and soul in the way he played songs like Simple Man and Tuesday's Gone. He didn't have a dad, but music became his way to speak. Back then, Gary didn't dream about being a rock star. He wanted to play baseball. His biggest goal was to join the New York Yankees. He played for local teams, spent hours practicing, and was known as a solid player. But in 1964, something unexpected happened. During a baseball game, Ronnie Van Zant accidentally hit a ball that injured Bob Burns. Instead of being upset, the 3 boys decided to hang out. That same day, they picked up their instruments and jammed in Bob's carport. They played Time Is on My Side by the Rolling Stones. That jam session changed everything. The energy felt right. The sound felt natural. They clicked, just like that. Baseball faded into the background, and music took over. There was a family who became just as important to Gary, the Van Zants. When Gary got suspended from school for having long hair, it was Lacey Van Zant, Ronnie's father, who stepped in. He went to the school and stood up for Gary. He told the school officials that Gary had lost his dad, that his mother needed the money Gary earned from playing gigs, and that long hair was part of the job. Whether it worked or not, it showed how much the Van Zants cared. They treated Gary like one of their own. Gary looked up to Ronnie Van Zant like a big brother. Ronnie was 3 years older, but that gap made all the difference. Ronnie didn't just teach him music, he taught him life. He taught him how to drive, how to carry himself, even how to talk to girls. It was everything Gary had missed growing up without a dad. They rehearsed non-stop in a hot, cramped shack they called the Hell House. Ronnie was tough, always demanding the best, but Gary appreciated it. He once said they all needed that push, because Ronnie just knew more than the rest of them. After that first jam session in 1964, things moved fast. They kept practicing, got tighter as a group, and soon added new members. One was Alan Collins, who actually ran and hid in a tree when he first saw Ronnie and Bob coming to his house. He thought they wanted to fight, but once they explained they wanted him in the band, he agreed. His guitar playing added something special. Then they brought in Larry Junstrom on bass. Larry had started on a regular guitar, but changed it into a bass with bits of balsa wood. Once he got the real thing, he never looked back. They went through a few names. First, they called themselves My Backyard, a nod to where they practiced. Then they became the Noble Five, and later the 1%. But in 1969, they picked the name that would make them legends, Lynyrd Skynyrd. It was a joke about their high school gym teacher, Lynyrd Skynyrd, who hated long hair. That name, with its weird spelling, stuck. It captured their rebellious spirit perfectly. By 16, Gary had made a decision that most teenagers wouldn't dare to make. He dropped out of high school. He knew the band was his future. It was risky. If the band failed, he had nothing to fall back on. But his mother backed him, even if it scared her. She believed in him, and Gary honored her by naming his most beloved guitar after her. That guitar, Bernice, became part of rock legend. Between 1964 and 1969, Lynyrd Skynyrd shaped what would become Southern rock. They mixed blues, country, and British rock into something new. Rossington and Collins built a two-guitar style that was unlike anything else. Their sound wasn't just loud. It had feeling. It told stories. It spoke to people. Gary liked his Gibson guitars, especially the Les Pauls and SGs, and played them through Marshall and PV amps. That warm, powerful tone became part of who they were. They didn't just create a band. They created a whole genre. Gary Rossington didn't just play guitar. He shaped a sound. Around 1970, he started messing around with slide guitar, but it wasn't working the way he wanted. The strings on his guitar were too low, and the slide kept hitting the frets. Most people would give up or change guitars. Gary picked up a screwdriver, jammed it under the strings near the nut, and raised the action himself. Then he did something even stranger. He tuned his B string down to G. Now he had two G strings side by side, and when he played, it created this thick, dragging, almost 12-string sound. It became his signature, and instead of wearing the slide on his pinky like most players, he wore it on his middle finger so he could see what he was doing better. That slide wasn't just any slide. It was a glass, chorus-eyed bottle, just like Duane Allman used. Gary stuck with that setup for the rest of his life. "I've never played Freebird live without it," he once said. The guitar he played most, Bernice, had its own story. One night in the early 70s, Gary was playing a show in Nashville when a girl in the crowd told him she had a guitar at home, just sitting in a closet. He and a few friends went over to check it out, and there it was, a 1959 Gibson Les Paul in nearly perfect condition. Her ex-boyfriend had left it behind. At first, she asked for $1,000, which was already a lot back then. When Gary came back with the cash, she told him someone had told her it might be worth $3,000. Somehow, he still walked away with it. He named the guitar Bernice, after his mother, who raised him alone after his dad died in the army. That guitar became part of his soul. He loved how it could shift tones depending on how he set his amp, warm and thick like a Les Paul should sound. But, with the treble cranked, it could cut through like a fender. No other guitar could do that for him. From 1974 to 1976, Lynyrd Skynyrd didn't just tour. They lived on the road. In 1974 alone, they played 132 concerts. The next year, they did 127. Then, 129 more in 1976. That meant they were performing almost non-stop, 2 to 3 times a week, nearly every week of the year. Most of their days were spent inside hot, noisy buses or cramped, shaky planes. It wore them down physically and mentally. Relationships were strained, tempers flared. It was a hard way to make a living, but the crowds kept getting bigger. The music kept getting louder. The band was getting sharper. But in September 1976, Gary Rossington hit a wall, literally. Drunk behind the wheel, he crashed his new Ford Torino into an oak tree. The tour was delayed. Rossington got fined $5,000. It wasn't just a reckless moment. It became a wake-up call. Ronnie Van Zant and Alan Collins turned that crash into a warning, writing the song That Smell About Rossington's spiraling behavior. He later admitted He was the Prince Charming. The lyrics were calling out. Still, despite the chaos, the endless touring paid off. The live shows got tighter, the fans more loyal, and all those hours on stage turned into gold when they finally recorded their live album in July 1976. They were at their peak. Right before that recording, something big happened. Steve Gaines joined the band in May 1976. It wasn't planned. It was a lucky break. His sister, Cassie, had joined the band's backup singers a few months earlier. She told the band to give Steve a shot. At first, they weren't sure, but they let him jam with them during a concert in Kansas City. The band couldn't hear much on stage that night, but the sound engineer, Kevin Elson, had headphones on. He heard something incredible. Steve Gaines was the real deal, even crazier. He was born on the exact same day as the guitarist he replaced, Ed King, September 14, 1949. Gaines didn't just fill a gap, he added something new. His third performance with the band was recorded for One More from the Road. That's how fast everything moved. Rossington would later say, Gaines had it all: guitar skills, stage presence, even vocals. Ronnie Van Zant, who rarely handed out praise, once said the whole band would end up in Gaines's shadow. He meant it, but getting Gaines up to speed wasn't easy. He had almost no time to learn their massive set list. The Fox Theater shows were only weeks away. He had to learn on the fly, watching, listening, jamming along, sometimes guessing what came next. For complex songs like Freebird, it got even trickier. Rossington had a special slide guitar tuning, and Gaines had to find space in the song without stepping on it. Somehow, it worked. The chemistry clicked. The three-guitar setup brought a whole new energy. It wasn't just loud, it was layered, tight, and unforgettable. Then came the breakthrough. On September 13, 1976, they released One More from the Road, recorded at the Fox Theater. That July, it exploded. Within 6 weeks, it went gold. By the end of December, it was platinum. Over the years, it climbed even higher, selling more than 3 million copies in the United States alone. Only their greatest hits album sold more. For Rossington, it meant everything. That same Fox Theater they'd recorded in, the band had helped save it from demolition 2 years earlier. Now, it was the stage for their biggest success. The live version of Free Bird, all 11 minutes of it, got radio play and charted. That kind of thing just didn't happen, but it did for them. With the album's success, they finally moved from being an opening act to headlining their own stadium shows. They were no longer just a Southern rock band. They were a national force. Lynyrd Skynyrd was on top of the world. After years of touring, fighting, and grinding their way to success, they had finally created something they all believed in, an album called Street Survivors. It came out on October 17, 1977, and it was their best work yet. They'd recorded it in 2 different studios. First with the legendary Tom Dowd in Miami, then again 5 months later in Georgia, with 2 uncredited producers. The results were powerful. The band had never sounded tighter, and a lot of that credit went to their new guitarist, Steve Gaines. He'd only joined the band a year earlier, thanks to a recommendation from his sister Cassie, who sang back up. But once he plugged in, everything changed. Ronnie Van Zant, the band's frontman, believed Steve would outshine them all one day. The album included 2 songs that really stood out. What's Your Name and That Smell. One was a radio hit. The other was a haunting warning about the band's own hard-living habits. Within just 10 days of release, Street Survivors went gold. It would eventually go double platinum, becoming the band's biggest commercial success. But just 3 days after the release, tragedy hit. The band boarded a plane for Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They had just finished a show in Greenville, South Carolina, and were flying on an old beat-up Convair CV-240. The tour was called Tour of the Survivors, which felt chilling in hindsight. The band already had plans to upgrade to a better jet. Drummer Artemis Pyle had joked that their current plane looked like it belonged to the Clampetts from the Beverly Hillbillies. Still, they got on board and took off around 4 p.m. Everything seemed normal. Some band members played cards. Ronnie Van Zant laid down on the floor with a pillow trying to rest. But as the sun started to set, something went wrong. The plane ran into fuel trouble. The pilots tried to land at a small airport nearby, but it was too far. With no other options, they aimed for an open field. What happened next was chaos. At 6:52 p.m., the plane hit the treetops and began tearing apart. Gary Rossington would later describe the sound as hundreds of baseball bats hitting the fuselage. The impact was violent. The wings and cockpit ripped away. The body of the plane twisted and turned as it slammed through the trees. People were thrown forward like rag dolls. Ronnie Van Zant had still been lying on the floor. Billy Powell would later say it felt like being smashed inside a metal coffee can. Artemis Pyle had made it to the cockpit earlier, but the pilot had sent him back to strap in. No one spoke. Some prayed. Then the crash came. Gary Rossington blacked out. When he came to, he was lying under a door in the middle of the woods, surrounded by broken metal and silence. He was injured and confused. The plane had been torn apart. Those in the front seats had taken the worst of it, which cruelly included most of the band. Billy Powell's face was a mess. His nose was nearly ripped off. He had deep cuts all over. Artemis Pyle had broken ribs, but still managed to crawl away from the wreck with 2 others to find help. They stumbled onto a nearby farm, but the man who lived there thought they were convicts and fired a warning shot. The survivors were scattered across hospitals, all of them in pain, unsure of who else had lived or died. Rossington wouldn't know the full truth until later. Lying in a hospital bed, his mother gave him the news. Ronnie Van Zant was dead. So were Steve Gaines and his sister Cassie. Dean Kilpatrick, the assistant road manager, was gone too. Both pilots were also killed. 6 lives lost in seconds. Billy Powell said Ronnie had flown forward and hit a tree at around 80 miles per hour. His head injury was fatal. It left almost no other marks, just a small bruise on his temple. The album they had just released became a symbol of cruel irony. The original cover showed the band standing in flames. After the crash, it felt too real, too painful. MCA Records pulled the image and replaced it with a black background out of respect. For Gary Rossington, it was more than just losing friends. It was like watching his whole life fall apart. They had started that band as teenagers in Jacksonville. They'd built it from nothing, and now the heart of it was gone. Ronnie was gone. Steve was gone. Cassie was gone. The dream had turned into a nightmare, and for the few left behind, nothing would ever be the same. Gary Rossington's road to recovery after the plane crash wasn't just painful. It was destructive in ways no one could have predicted. The injuries he suffered were brutal, and doctors prescribed powerful painkillers to help him get through it. But what started as medical treatment slowly turned into something far more dangerous. The pills dulled the pain, but they also became a crutch. As his body got used to the medication, it stopped working the way it used to. So Gary took more. Then stronger drugs. Eventually, He turned to cocaine and other substances just to make it through the day. The emotional weight of surviving a crash that killed his bandmates didn't help. He was battling grief, guilt, and constant physical pain all at once. In September 1977, just weeks before the crash, Gary had married Martha Claire Millen. What should have been the start of a beautiful new chapter turned into a nightmare almost overnight. Martha was suddenly thrust into the role of caregiver for a man who was broken in every way. Gary was in and out of hospitals, struggling with the kind of trauma that never really goes away. The man she married was slowly disappearing, buried under layers of medication and emotional scars. The stress became too much. As he poured himself into forming the Rossington Collins Band in 1980, with fellow survivor Alan Collins, their marriage fell apart. By June of that year, the divorce was finalized, less than 3 years together, and most of it spent in the aftermath of tragedy. In early 1979, during Charlie Daniels' volunteer jam in Nashville, a glimmer of the old fire returned. Survivors of Skynyrd walked on stage and played an instrumental version of Free Bird. It was raw, it was painful, but it reminded everyone that they were still here. That moment sparked something in Gary. He and fellow survivor Alan Collins decided they weren't done with music yet. They didn't want to remake Skynyrd. They wanted something new. So they formed the Rossington Collins Band. To set their sound apart, they brought in Dale Krantz, a powerhouse female vocalist who had been touring with 38 Special. It wasn't an easy decision. Dale was nervous. These weren't just musicians. They were legends. But she took the leap. The band took its time in the studio, writing and rewriting songs until everything felt right. But things didn't go smoothly. Artemis Pyle was supposed to be their drummer, but he broke his leg in a motorcycle crash. That opened the door for Derek Hess, another Jacksonville native. The group eventually settled into a 7-piece band, including 4 Skynyrd survivors and 3 new faces. Together, they weren't just making music, they were trying to heal. Their first album, Anytime, Anyplace, Anywhere, hit hard. It climbed to number 13 on the Billboard 200 and went gold. Don't misunderstand me, became a radio staple. Critics loved them. They weren't Skynyrd 2.0, they had their own identity. But while the music was strong, life behind the scenes wasn't easy. Their second album, This Is the Way, didn't perform as well. And just when they needed stability, Alan Collins' wife, Kathy, died. The loss crushed him. Things got even more complicated when Gary and Dale, now a couple, decided to get married and move away from Jacksonville. Tensions grew. Substance abuse crept in. The band couldn't hold together under all that pressure. By 1982, it was over. Alan went on to form the Alan Collins Band, using most of the old group except for Gary and Dale. Gary and Dale's story didn't stop there. Their first meeting had happened back in 1977, before the crash, when Dale was singing back up for 38 Special on tour with Skynyrd. Fate had already introduced them, but it was in 1979, when Gary was searching for a new sound that their bond deepened. Dale was hesitant at first, overwhelmed by the idea of joining such a high-profile band. But once she stepped in, her voice became part of the healing. That working relationship soon turned romantic. They got married on July 13, 1982. From that day on, they were inseparable, partners in life and in music. Dale had just come out of a short-lived marriage, but with Gary, it was different. Their relationship lasted more than 40 years, through every twist and turn life threw at them. After the breakup of Rossington Collins Band, Gary and Dale vanished from the spotlight for a while. They moved to Wyoming, built a home, started a family, and took a breath. But the itch to create never really left. In 1986, they came back with a new band called Rossington. Their first album returned to the scene of the crime, brought in a mix of fresh talent, like guitarist Jay Johnson and sax player Ronnie Eads. Derek Hess returned on drums. They had the energy, the songs, and the experience. But the album didn't catch fire commercially, and Atlantic Records dropped them. When Lynyrd Skynyrd came back together in 1987, it didn't feel like a celebration. Gary Rossington, the only original member still alive at the time, made it clear this wasn't a reunion, and it definitely wasn't a happy occasion. They were honoring something that ended in tragedy, not throwing a party. What was supposed to be a short 6-week tour turned into something much bigger and much messier. It sparked lawsuits, especially from the widows of Ronnie Van Zant and Steve Gaines, who said the band had broken a promise not to use the Skynyrd name to make money. After a legal battle, they reached a deal. If the band was going to tour as Lynyrd Skynyrd, Rossington and at least 2 other pre-crash members had to be there, and the widows would get nearly 30% of the money. But Gary never backed down. He believed the band deserved more than to be remembered only by a plane crash. The biggest controversy came with the man who would stand at center stage, Johnny Van Zant, Ronnie's younger brother. He had to do the impossible, keep his brother's legacy alive while also being himself. Fans were divided, but Johnny stuck with it, and over time he proved he could carry the name. He wasn't trying to replace Ronnie, he was trying to honor him. For 36 years, Johnny and Gary worked side by side through highs and lows, until Gary passed away in 2023. After that, Johnny promised the band would keep going, not for money, not for fame, but for the fans, for Ronnie, and for Gary. The tour that started in 1987 was only meant to be a tribute. Leon Wilkeson even said they thought about calling it LS2, something different. But after playing in over 30 cities for more than 600,000 fans, they realized the music wasn't just a memory. It was alive. The double live album, Southern by the Grace of God, captured that feeling. Fans weren't just showing up to remember. They were there because Skynyrd still had something to say. What was supposed to end after a few months turned into decades. They kept going all the way to 2022. Then came a big step, making new music. On June 11, 1991, they released Lynyrd Skynyrd 1991, the first studio album since the crash. It was more than just songs, it was proof they weren't stuck in the past. Johnny was on vocals, Gary on guitar, Ed King came back, Randall Hall joined, Billy Powell on keys, Leon Wilkeson on bass. Artemis Pyle was credited, but didn't play. Kurt Custer actually did the drumming. The album hit number 64 in the United States, and did even better in Finland and Canada. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it was solid. It said, "We're still here." And the fans listened. But behind the scenes, Gary Rossington was fighting a different kind of battle. One with his own heart. He had serious heart problems for years, partly from injuries in the 1977 crash, and they only got worse. In 2015, he had a major heart attack. In 2016, he needed surgery, then another procedure in 2019. He kept performing anyway. His doctors told him to stop. He didn't, even in 2021, when he had emergency surgery and couldn't tour for a while. He made sure the band kept going. Johnny would tell the crowd, "We're kicking ass in Gary's honor." That's how much he loved the music and the fans. In 2018, a documentary called If I Leave Here Tomorrow finally gave Gary a chance to tell their story the way he wanted. He was tired of all the old documentaries focusing on the bad stuff. This one showed the brotherhood, the love, the family. Watching it was tough. Seeing Ronnie again on screen hit him hard. There was a moment in the film when Gary and Ronnie were just looking at each other, and a song played about losing friends. Gary broke down. He admitted, "I cried a few times. You just can't help it." Even his daughters cried, because they were hearing parts of his story he never shared. Gary's final gift came during the early days of the COVID-19 lockdown. In April 2020, he helped release a song called "Last of the Street Survivors" as a free download. He co-wrote it with Johnny Van Zant, Ricky Medlock, and Tom Hambridge. It felt like a farewell, even though no one knew how close that really was. His last live show was in November 2022 at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville. He played That Smell, and then joined the band one last time for Freebird. That night was recorded. It'll be released on June 27th, 2025, as celebrating 50 years, Live at the Ryman, his final performance. After Gary died in 2023 at 71, Ricky Medlock shared that there were still around 24 recordings, unfinished songs, old demos, and memories with Gary's voice in the background. The band plans to use those for a tribute album. The goal isn't just to remember Gary, but to keep his sound alive. Even in death, Gary's music still plays on.